At a research center in Cambridge, England, 3 environmental activists break in and find a secret laboratory. There, several chimpanzees are being used in sinister experiments that turn the animals into aggressive beings. Shortly afterwards, one of the scientists appears and tries to run away, but is stopped by the activists, who promise to take him to the authorities and free the animals. The scientist warns them not to touch the cages, as the chimpanzees have been infected with an unknown type of rabies pathogen. Even so, one of the members opens the cage and the chimpanzee jumps out at her, biting her neck. Within seconds, she is infected and spurts blood from her mouth, infecting one of her colleagues. Desperate, the scientist tells them that they must be eliminated before the infection spreads throughout the whole place. However, the 2 infected people, now more aggressive and with red eyes, attack everyone in the laboratory, and soon the pathogen spreads throughout the country. 28 days later, in a London hospital, delivery man Jim regains consciousness after a traffic accident. With a lot of effort, he picks up some clothes and stores supplies in a plastic bag, but finds no one in the whole hospital. If that wasn't strange enough, when he leaves he comes across a completely empty London. The young man has no idea what has happened, but after walking around the city, Jim finds a huge mural with several photos of people who are missing. All this only makes him more confused, and he goes to a church, where he sees the message, "Repent, the end is near," written in blood on the wall. To make matters worse, when he arrives at the hall, several bodies are piled up around the chairs. Hoping that someone is still alive, Jim calls for help, which causes 2 guys to stand up, with strange expressions on their faces. Frightened, he makes his way to the exit, when he comes across the church priest, moving and grunting like a wild animal. The priest advances to attack Jim, who defends himself by hitting him with his bag of groceries. Even so, the priest continues to crawl towards him, forcing Jim to flee the church, but other infected begin to chase him through the streets. He's almost reached, but luckily 2 masked guys start throwing explosive bottles to set the infected on fire. They then take Jim to safety and blow up a gas station, with the impact wave hitting the rest of the gang. Now that they are out of danger, the masked ones introduce themselves as Mark and Selena. They bring Jim up to speed on the situation, saying that a pathogen has spread at an absurd rate, affecting the whole of England and being reported in places like Paris and New York. The government tried to establish control, but the army was unable to contain the situation and most of the population was infected. The few survivors tried their luck by fleeing the country, in what became known as the Great Exodus. Shocked to discover the tragic truth, Jim says he has to go to the nearest town to make sure his family is all right. The next morning, Mark and Selena accompany him there, but when they arrive at the house, Jim finds his parents lifeless in bed. Apparently, they decided to leave in peace, holding a photo of Jim with a farewell message written on the back. Faced with this sad scene, Jim cries in front of the bodies and Selena tries to comfort him, saying that they had a dignified end, unlike so many others affected by the disease. Now they have to rest for the rest of the day in the house, because it's too late to go back and they shouldn't go out on the streets at night. Mark and Selena try to rest, but Jim can't sleep and goes into the kitchen holding a lighted candle. When he sees the photos on the fridge and his mother's old recipe book, he remembers the good times they had together. Unfortunately, the light from the candle in his hand attracts 2 more infected, who come through the kitchen door and knock him to the floor. Selena and Mark soon wake up to the noise and manage to eliminate the infected with blows from their machetes. As soon as the confrontation is over, Selena asks if Jim has been bitten or has come into contact with the infected's blood. Jim says no, but to Mark's misfortune, he sees that his arm is seriously injured. Without hesitation, Selena attacks him with the machete until she knocks him out and tells Jim that there's no time to lose, as they need to get out of there immediately. After cleaning up and changing, the 2 continue walking down the street, with Jim asking more about the infection. Selena replies that if a person comes into contact with the blood, the pathogen will overwhelm them in about 20 seconds. That's how long it takes to eliminate an infected person, and Selena warns that she will do the same to Jim if it happens to him. Despite her coldness, she regrets what happened to Mark, who still had many plans for his life even in the face of an apocalyptic reality. The pair continue walking through the city, when they see an apartment in the distance, with Christmas lights flashing on the balcony. They believe it's a sign for survivors and go to the building, which has its entrance blocked by shopping carts piled up. With a lot of effort, the 2 manage to climb them and find the emergency staircase. Despite their tiredness, they both climb the many steps, but Jim runs out of energy because he hasn't eaten properly over the last few days. Selena says she only has cans of soda and painkillers in her backpack, but the 2 of them will have to make do with that for now. They then take a break to rest on the stairs, but soon hear the grunts of the infected approaching rapidly. The pair are forced to flee again, but Jim is still weak and begins to fall behind. The infected are getting closer and closer, but then a man in military clothes with a tactical shield appears in front of them and shows them the way out. The two run for their lives, while the guy stops the infected and eliminates them with strokes of his baton. With the problem solved, he shows Jim and Selena where his apartment is and introduces himself as Frank, a cab driver who lives with his daughter Hannah. The guy is excited to see other survivors and lets them rest for the rest of the night. Jim takes the opportunity to shave, even though there's no water in the taps, and Frank lets him sleep in the living room while Selena takes the guest room. At bedtime, Jim meets up with Selena, who is worried about Frank and Hannah's situation. It seems they are already running out of resources and won't be able to survive much longer living in that building. Jim suggests helping them, but she replies that the two of them will only slow them down and they need to focus on their own survival. The next morning, Frank takes Jim to the top of the building, where he has placed dozens of buckets to collect drinking water. The problem is that it's been days since the last rain in London and they're already running out of supplies. Frank says his only hope is to find a colony of survivors, which he discovered through a recorded message transmitted by radio. Selena doesn't believe it exists, but the old taxi driver uses his radio and manages to pick up a message from a group of soldiers. They say they have weapons and food to shelter survivors, and their location is near Manchester at Block 42. It's a 3-day trip by car and Frank says he still has his old cab in the garage. Selena still doesn't think it's a good idea, but Jim agrees to go, as they'll soon run out of food and more infected people will try to invade the building. The four of them hit the road, and on the way Frank finds a shortcut through an underground tunnel. Jim thinks it's best to turn around, but the old man insists on taking the shortcut, finding the tunnel full of abandoned cars and a huge blockage in the way. Thanks to his experience as a driver, Frank gets through the roadblock without too much trouble, but one of the tires ends up going flat halfway through. Frank and Hannah work together to change it, but Jim hears a familiar noise coming from far away. Shortly afterwards, dozens of rats start running through the tunnel, indicating that they are on the run from something or someone. As Jim feared, several infected begin to invade the tunnel and the four of them work as a team to change the tire as quickly as possible. Finally, they manage to fix the car and start it, escaping at the last second. After almost being eliminated in the tunnel, the group finds a supermarket that seems to be intact. Without thinking twice, they start filling trolleys with food, drink, and chocolates for the trip. Best of all, they don't have to pay anything. With this moment of relaxation, the four hit the road again, but soon have to park at a gas station to refuel. While Frank gets the gas and Selena keeps watch, Jim decides to go to the diner to see if there are any hamburgers left. Instead, he finds the place stinking and several bodies strewn across the counter. This makes him angrier about the current situation in the world, and in a moment of desperation, the man asks aloud if there is anyone inside. To his misfortune, there was an infected boy, who tried to attack him from behind, but Jim defended himself with his baseball bat. He manages to wrestle the little infected to the ground, and for a moment hesitates to attack, but is forced to eliminate him, thus putting him out of his misery. With the car refueled, the four continue their journey, but stop near a farm to camp. During the meal, Frank calls them to see a herd of horses free from infection and living normally among the fields. This sight gives the group more hope and even Selena begins to rethink her attitudes. In a moment alone, she asks Jim if he thinks about the fact that probably no movie, song or book will be created after this incident. He says that he hasn't been thinking about that, but rather about helping other survivors as best he can. For the first time, Selena lets go of her strong stance and says that after meeting Jim, Frank and Hannah, she also started to see things that way. As night falls, the four of them try to get some sleep and Selena suggests taking one of her sleeping pills, which she has kept since she trained as a chemist. Hannah and Jim agree to take it, but Frank prefers to stay up and watch for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jim wakes up to the honking of Frank's car horn, with the group calling him to go on their way. The four then hit the road again, until they reach the city of Manchester, where the military base is located. However, when they look at the horizon, they see a gigantic fire taking over the city and there is no one to put it out. Nevertheless, they continue on and reach military roadblock number 42, indicated in the radio message. However, the place seems to have been abandoned for days and Selena thinks it's best to get out of there, as she senses that something is wrong. Frank insists on continuing to search, but soon becomes angry when he realizes that their last hope is gone. The others tell him to keep going, but the old man gets angry and continues his search without success. When he finally realizes that the place is empty, Frank feels despondent, believing that there is nowhere else to go. Then he sees a crow devouring the body of a soldier and the man tries to scare it away by kicking the gate underneath him. Unfortunately, A drop of the soldier's blood falls straight into his eye, and Frank knows what that means. Seconds later, Hannah appears and her father asks her to stay away from him, saying that he loves her very much. Hannah doesn't understand why her father is saying this, but Frank begins to be affected by the pathogen and pushes the girl away from him. Soon after, Jim and Selena arrive on the scene and realize that Frank has also become infected. Left with no choice, Jim sends Selena to look after Hannah and prepares his baseball bat to eliminate the girl's father. But before he can, several soldiers appear on the scene and shoot Frank with their guns. Despite this sad scene, there is no time to mourn the loss of Frank, and the three are taken away by the military. As soon as they arrive at the base, the trio are introduced to Major West, the group's leader, who welcomes them as guests, providing water, food, and clean clothes. Jim is satisfied with this, but Selena and Hannah are still traumatized by what happened to Frank. Once they've settled into one of the rooms, Selena tells him that she's not confident about this military installation and worries about Hannah's safety. Minutes later, Jim goes to talk to the major, who takes the young man to see the facilities and shows him that his team is taking care of security, as well as having managed to create a boiler to provide hot water. Finally, the major takes him to an alley, where they come across an infected man bound by chains. Jim is frightened, but the major doesn't react and tells him that he was once one of his companions, but ended up being bitten and is now being used as a guinea pig for studies. The major's aim is to find out how long it takes for an infected person to be eliminated by starvation. Jim finds this attitude appalling and begins to question whether the major and his group are as kind as they seem. Things only get stranger at dinner time, when Jim, Selena, and Hannah sit at the table with the major and his soldiers. As well as acting like impulsive teenagers, the major shows no respect for human life, belittling everyone who has lost their lives to the infection. This attitude bothers Hannah, who refuses to eat dinner and says she wants to bury her perished father's body. However, the conversation is interrupted when an infected person approaches the base and triggers the alarm by stepping on a landmine. The noise of the explosion begins to attract more of them, but one by one they are eliminated by the soldiers' heavy artillery. After the confrontation, the group goes back inside and finds Selena next to Jim, armed with machetes and asking what happened. One of the soldiers, called Mitch, takes an interest in Selena and takes her machete, daring her to take it back. She tries to fight back, but he holds her down, prompting Jim to confront him. Despite his best efforts, Mitch easily disarms him, but Sergeant Farrell doesn't like his colleague's attitude and knocks him down with a blow from his gun. The major quickly interrupts the argument and orders everyone back to their positions, as well as returning Selena's machete. He apologizes for what happened and calls Jim into his office for a drink. There, the major asks how many people he's eliminated, and Jim confesses that he was forced to finish off an infected boy who attacked him in the station's cafeteria. The major understands that this was an act of survival and that he acts in the same way with his men. He says that a few days ago the group was getting desperate, so he sent out a radio message to attract people, promising the soldiers that he would find other survivors, especially women. On hearing this, Jim discovers the sick intentions of the major, who has helped them only so that Hannah and Selena can be captured. Disgruntled, he rushes to find the girls and get them away from there, but as he tries to escape with them down the corridor, Jim is knocked down by one of the soldiers. When he wakes up, he sees Sergeant Farrell pointing a gun at his colleagues, saying that he doesn't support their despicable attitude. However, he is surrendered by the other soldiers and is taken along with Jim to the military base prison. The next morning, the two are handcuffed and taken into the forest by soldiers Mitchell and Jones. As soon as they arrive at a place full of human bodies, Mitchell prepares to eliminate them right there, but Farrell resists and says that his colleagues are going down the wrong path. Mitchell gets angry and threatens to eliminate him with a knife, but Jones tells him to shoot him so they can get it over with. His colleague refuses and lunges towards Farrell with the knife, but Jones gets nervous and shoots the sergeant. This makes Mitchell furious and he attacks Jones, giving Jim the chance to escape and jump over the wall. As the infected are scattered around, the two believe that he won't survive outside and decide to return to the base. Meanwhile, Jim runs through the forest and ends up falling to the ground, where he sees a plane passing through the sky. This indicates that there are other survivors outside and he decides to find them, but first he needs to rescue Selena and Hannah. Back at the base, the major tells the two to get ready to serve his soldiers. When they get there, the guys start threatening them in various terrible ways, and to protect Hannah, Selena kisses one of the soldiers and asks the group to wait outside the restroom. The soldiers leave, but shortly afterwards, one of them changes his mind and advances towards Selena. At that moment, everyone hears an alarm noise coming from Blockade 42 and the soldiers go to see what happened, without suspecting that it was Jim who had set off the alarm to lure them into the trap. Arriving at the scene, the Major and Private Davis start shooting all over the place. At one point, Davis decides to search alone, but when he tries to climb a ladder, Jim appears and attacks him by surprise using a crowbar. The Major goes to look for Davis, but finds his body placed inside the vehicle. Then more infected begin to appear and the Major pulls Davis out of the car and tries to start it, but Jim has cut the vehicle's power cables. Unable to escape, the Major eliminates all the infected with his gun and is forced to walk back to base. However, Jim arrives on the scene first, and using Davis's gun, he shoots the chain holding the infected in the alley, to help him eliminate the rest of the soldiers. Meanwhile, Selena and Hannah are being held prisoner, but Mitchell realizes that the Major is taking his time and goes after him. He leaves Clifton watching the girls, but the man doesn't notice the infected coming from the other side of the window and is attacked by him. Jones tries to help him, but ends up missing his target and his gun gets stuck. As a result, the infected man draws blood on Clifton's face, and within seconds he is overwhelmed by the pathogen. Hannah and Selena take the chance to escape, but run into Mitchell and his friend Bedford. They ask what happened, but see the infected chasing Jones and decide to hide the girls in the attic. Bedford decides to go after the infected and finds him in the kitchen, looking for Jones, who has hidden inside the cupboard. The soldier readies his weapon, but before he knows it, Clifton appears behind him and attacks him. Just then, Jones continues to hide, but as soon as everything falls silent, he tries to escape. However, just as he was about to cross the corridor, he runs into Jim, who hits him with the combat knife attached to his gun. Nearby, Mitchell continues to lead the girls on, but Hannah manages to escape and runs to the bathroom, where she looks for her family photo. She manages to get the photo back, but hears Clifton's grunts and hides behind a mirror. Luckily, even though he can smell the girl, the infected man sees his reflection in the mirror and leaves. Hannah is safe, at least for now, but Selena has yet to be rescued, and Mitchell takes her to the attic. Jim ends up following them, and taking advantage of the soldier's moment of distraction, he breaks into the attic and attacks him. Mitchell tries to resist, but Jim, at the limit of his fury, pushes his head against the wall, knocking him out with a direct hit to the eye. This aggressive attitude makes Selena think that Jim is infected and she arms herself with her machete. But when she sees that he is still human, she kisses him, but the romantic moment is interrupted by Hannah, who hits Jim with a vase because she thought he was another infected. As soon as he recovers from the blow, Jim calls the two of them to follow him to the exit, before any more soldiers show up. Outside, they find Frank's cab, but inside is the Major, who shoots Jim for eliminating all his soldiers. However, Hannah manages to get into the car and drives in reverse towards the entrance to the base. Seconds later, one of the infected jumps through the rear window and grabs the Major, pulling him out of the car. Finally, Hannah picks up Jim and Selena with the cab and the three of them drive away, but soon see that the gate ahead is locked. Even so, the girl speeds up the car and crashes into the gate, with the three of them managing to escape from the military base. Another 28 days pass and Jim wakes up in a bed, after having been in hospital and saved by Selena. Now, the three of them are hiding out on a farm, with enough supplies to survive for a few more days. Far away, an airplane flies over the site, where some of the infected are lying on the ground with no strength left to continue because of hunger. Back at the farm, Selena is finishing sewing some fabric and Hannah tells them that she hears a plane approaching. The trio quickly pick up the fabrics and start spreading them across the field, forming the word hello. Then the same plane passes right next to them, and the three wave, hoping that the pilot can find them. Afterwards, Selena asks Jim and Hannah if someone will come to help them this time, but the answer remains a mystery. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.